The morning of the invasion dawned crimson across the surface of Kepler 442b, casting long shadows through the command deck of the ZWS Devastator. Commander Zakthal stood before the massive viewing portal, his forearms crossed behind his chitinous back as he gazed down at the blue marble that hung in space before them. Earth looked so small from here, so fragile and defenseless. It was almost disappointing. "Status report," he commanded, his voice carrying the distinctive harmonic undertones of his species. The bridge crew, a mixture of Zephyrian warriors and allied species, snapped to attention. "All ships report ready, Commander," replied his tactical officer, a spider-like arachnoid whose 8 eyes gleamed in the artificial light. 700 vessels in perfect formation. "The humans have detected our approach, but their primitive sensor arrays can barely track our scout ships, let alone comprehend the size of our fleet." Zakthal's mandibles clicked together in what passed for a smile among his kind. The Third Talon fleet was the pride of the Zephyrian Empire, a force that had never known defeat. Each ship was a masterpiece of military engineering, armored with quantum-locked hull plating and armed with weapons that could crack open planets. The crews were the best the galaxy had to offer, genetically perfect soldiers bred for war, their bodies enhanced with cybernetic implants that made them faster, stronger, and deadlier than any natural organism. "And their defensive preparations?" Zakthal asked, though he already knew the answer would be laughable. "Minimal, sir. A handful of orbital platforms, some primitive missile batteries, and what appears to be a small fleet of chemical-powered rockets they're calling warships." The tactical officer's multiple eyes seemed to dance with amusement. "Our intelligence estimates suggest we outnumber them 50 to 1, and that's being generous with their capabilities." The commander nodded, his confidence absolute. This would be over quickly. The humans had managed to spread across a few dozen worlds in their local stellar neighborhood, but they were still using technology that the Zephyrian Empire had abandoned millennia ago. Kinetic weapons, crude nuclear devices, ships that took months to travel between stars. It was like watching children play with sticks while an adult army approached with plasma cannons. "Sir, we're receiving multiple communication attempts from the human vessels," reported the communications officer, a pale, elongated being from the Outer Rim territories. "They appear to be trying to negotiate." "Let them waste their breath," Zakthal replied dismissively. "Their surrender will be accepted in due time, but first they must understand the futility of resistance. Begin the demonstration." He turned to his weapons officer, a massive Krogar whose muscle-bound frame barely fit into the command chair. "Target their largest orbital station. Full power pulse cannon. I want their entire species to see what happens when they stand against the Empire." "Aye, Commander." The weapons officer's thick fingers danced across his control panel with surprising delicacy. "Charging primary pulse cannon. Target acquired. Ready to fire on your command." Zakthal watched through the viewing portal as the massive weapon arrays on his ship's hull began to glow with deadly energy. The pulse cannon was capable of destroying a moon with a single shot. Using it on a space station was like using a sledgehammer to kill a fly. But sometimes overwhelming force was the best teacher. "Fire," he commanded. A lance of pure energy, blindingly bright even through the portal's protective filters, shot across the void toward the human station. The beam moved at near light speed, giving the primitive defenders no chance to react. For a moment, the station simply disappeared in a sphere of white-hot plasma. When the light faded, there was nothing left but expanding debris and the fading glow of vaporized metal. "Direct hit, sir. Target completely destroyed." The weapons officer's report was unnecessary, they could all see the results. Detecting energy spikes from multiple human vessels. They appear to be powering weapons. Zakthal's laugh was a sound like grinding metal. "Let them come. It will save us the trouble of hunting them down one by one." But, even as he spoke, something nagged at the edge of his consciousness. The human's response seemed too quick, too coordinated. Intelligence had suggested they were a fractured species, constantly fighting among themselves. Yet here they were, moving as one unified force with a precision that spoke of careful planning and preparation. "Commander," the tactical officer's voice carried a note of confusion. "I'm detecting unusual readings from the human ships. Their energy signatures don't match our intelligence reports.
Explain, Zakthal ordered, moving closer to the tactical display.
Well, sir, our data suggested they were using primitive fusion reactors for power, but these readings indicate something far more advanced.
And their weapons. The officer paused, his multiple eyes focusing intently on his instruments.
Sir, they're not using the kinetic projectiles we expected. These energy signatures suggest some form of exotic matter manipulation.
Zakthal felt the first stirring of unease, though he pushed it down.
Intelligence could be wrong about technical details, but the fundamental assessment remained unchanged. Humans were a young species, barely out of their planetary cradle.
Whatever modifications they'd made to their technology couldn't possibly threaten a fleet of this magnitude. Numbers, officer. Give me numbers I can understand. 7 human vessels approaching from multiple vectors.
Estimated mass suggests they're much smaller than our destroyers, but, sir.
The tactical officer's voice trailed off as his readings updated.
Commander, I'm detecting massive gravitational distortions around the lead vessel.
That shouldn't be possible with their technology level. Before Zakthal could respond, the communications officer interrupted with growing alarm.
Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet.
Audio only, but the signal strength suggests it's coming from their flagship.
Put it through, Zakthal commanded. He would hear their surrender personally. The voice that filled the bridge was calm, measured, and spoke in perfect galactic standard, a language that should have been beyond human comprehension.
Zephyrian vessels, this is Admiral Saracen of the Terran Defense Force.
You have committed an act of war against the Sol system and murdered 3,000 civilians. You have 30 seconds to withdraw your forces beyond the heliopause, or we will consider you hostile combatants and respond accordingly. The bridge fell silent. The audacity of the message was staggering, a handful of primitive vessels threatening the greatest fleet in the galaxy.
Zakthal's mandibles clicked rapidly as he processed what he'd heard. Did they just threaten us? Asked the weapons officer in disbelief.
Apparently so, Zakthal replied, his voice carrying cold amusement.
How refreshingly naive. Open a channel, let me educate them about their situation.
The communications officer nodded, and Zakthal stepped forward to address the humans directly.
Human Admiral, I am Commander Zakthal of the 3rd Talon Fleet.
You face 700 of the finest warships ever constructed, crewed by warriors whose ancestors were conquering star systems when your species was learning to make fire. Your threat is noted and dismissed. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded.
This is your only warning.
The response came immediately, and the tone hadn't changed at all, still calm, still measured, as if the human admiral were discussing the weather rather than facing impossible odds.
Commander Zakthal, thank you for identifying yourself.
You should know that this conversation is being recorded and will be submitted as evidence in your war crimes trial, should you survive the next few minutes.
You've had your warning. Chen out. The channel closed, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Zakthal stared at the communication console in disbelief.
Either these humans were the bravest fools in the galaxy, or there was something they knew that he didn't. Sir, the tactical officer's voice cut through his thoughts, the human vessels are accelerating to attack speed.
But, Commander, these readings can't be right.
According to my instruments, they're approaching at nearly 15% light speed.
That's impossible, Zakthal snapped.
No ship that small could achieve those velocities without being torn apart by relativistic effects.
I'm reading multiple confirmations, sir.
And, something else, massive energy buildups across their entire fleet.
Whatever weapons they're carrying, they're charging them now. Zakthal felt his confidence waver for the first time in his military career.
15% light speed was faster than anything in the Zephyrian fleet could manage, despite their massive size and advanced technology.
How were primitive humans achieving such velocities?
All ships, defensive formation, he ordered.
Raise quantum shields to maximum. And, get me a targeting solution on that flagship.
But, even as his orders went out across the fleet, Zakthal couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. The humans were acting with a confidence that went far beyond bravado. They moved their ships like they knew exactly what they were doing, like they'd planned for this moment. But, how could they have prepared for an invasion they couldn't possibly have seen coming? The answer came 60 seconds later when the human flagship opened fire. The weapon that lanced out toward the Devastator wasn't the primitive energy beam Zakthal expected. Instead, space itself seemed to twist and writhe around a dark projectile that moved faster than his sensors could track. The quantum shields, which could deflect the full fury of a star's plasma, simply weren't there when the projectile arrived. The weapon passed through the defensive screens like they didn't exist and struck the Devastator's hull with impossible force. The ship shuddered from bow to stern, armor plating that could withstand planet-cracking impacts crumpling like paper. Emergency lights flashed across the bridge's system after system reported critical damage. Report! Zakthal barked, his calm demeanor finally cracking. Direct hit to sectors 7 through 12, came the damage control officer's shaken voice. Quantum shield generators are offline. Hull breaches on 17 decks. Sir, whatever hit us, it went straight through our armor like it wasn't even there. How is that possible? Unknown, sir. The projectile seems to have been some form of controlled singularity, but the energy requirements for such a weapon. The officer's voice trailed off in disbelief. Before Zakthal could process this information fully, 6 more impossibly fast projectiles streaked toward his fleet. 6 more massive warships, each the pride of their respective battle groups, simply ceased to exist as the dark weapons tore through them like they were made of tissue paper. All ships, evasive maneuvers. Zakthal shouted. Return fire. Everything we have. The Third Talon fleet responded with devastating efficiency, 700 ships unleashing their full arsenal at the 7 human vessels. Pulse cannons that could shatter continents, plasma torpedoes that burned at stellar temperatures, and quantum disruptors that could unmake matter at the subatomic level all converged on the approaching enemy. The humans didn't even try to dodge. They flew straight through the barrage as if it were nothing more than a light rain. Energy shields that should have been impossible for their technology level absorbed impacts that would have destroyed lesser fleets. When the bombardment ended, all 7 human ships remained completely intact. Status of enemy vessels? Zakthal asked, though he already knew the answer from the tactical display. No damage detected, sir. Their shields absorbed everything. But, Commander, I don't understand how they're doing this. The energy output required for that level of defense should have caused their reactors to overload. Zakthal stared at the tactical screen, watching the 7 human ships continue their steady approach toward his fleet. They moved with mechanical precision, maintaining perfect formation while his own vessels scrambled to reorganize after losing 6 capital ships in the opening seconds of battle. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The humans should have been running or surrendering by now, not advancing like they owned the battlefield. Something was terribly, catastrophically wrong with the intelligence reports. Get me a connection to Imperial Command, he ordered. Priority Alpha. I need to know everything they have on recent human technological development. Sir, that will take at least 20 minutes to establish a secure channel across, then, get me something faster. Zakthal's voice echoed across the bridge. These humans have technology that shouldn't exist. I need to know how and where they got it. The communications officer worked frantically at his station while the battle continued around them. The human ships had closed to medium range and were systematically targeting the largest vessels in the fleet. Each shot from their impossible weapons removed another ship from existence, and there seemed to be no defense against the attacks. Commander, the tactical officer called out, his voice tight with barely controlled panic, long-range sensors are detecting additional contacts. Multiple human fleets approaching from the outer system. Sir, there are thousands of them. Zakthal felt something cold settle in his stomach. That's impossible. Intelligence confirmed that Earth only had a few dozen combat vessels. I'm showing at least 3,000 confirmed contacts, sir, with more appearing every minute. They must have been hiding behind the outer planets, using some form of stealth technology. The commander stared at the updated tactical display in growing horror. What had seemed like a simple pacification mission was rapidly turning into the largest space battle in galactic history.
And, somehow, impossibly, his force was losing.
All ships, prepare to withdraw to minimum safe distance, he ordered. We need time to reassess the situation. But, even as he gave the command, Zakthal realized it might already be too late. The human fleets were moving to surround his forces, their impossible ships accelerating to speeds that defied physics. Whatever these creatures had become, they were no longer the primitive species described in the intelligence reports.
They were something else entirely.
Something that had been waiting in the dark corners of space for someone to make the mistake of threatening their home. And, as the battle raged around him, Commander Zakthal began to understand that he might not live long enough to warn the Empire about what humanity had truly become. The retreat had lasted exactly 14 minutes before the humans cut off their escape route. Zakthal watched in growing disbelief as enemy vessels seemed to materialize out of empty space, their stealth technology far beyond anything the Empire possessed. What had begun as an orderly withdrawal had become a desperate fighting retreat through a gauntlet of impossible weapons and incomprehensible tactics. Status report, he demanded, his voice maintaining its authority despite the chaos erupting around his fleet. 47 ships lost, sir, his tactical officer reported, his multiple eyes darting between displays that showed nothing but bad news.
The humans are using some form of instantaneous communication system.
Their fleets coordinate perfectly across impossible distances.
Zakthal processed this information with growing unease.
Instantaneous communication was theoretically possible but required technology that even the Empire's greatest scientists considered purely hypothetical.
How had humans, barely out of their own solar system, achieved such breakthroughs?
Sir, incoming transmission from Imperial Command, announced the communications officer.
Admiral Vextai himself.
The viewing screen flickered to life, revealing the scarred visage of the Empire's supreme military commander. Admiral Vextai's reputation was legendary. He had personally overseen the conquest of 43 star systems and never lost a single engagement. His presence on the channel meant the situation had reached the highest levels of Imperial attention.
Commander Zakthal, the Admiral's voice carried the weight of absolute authority.
Explain to me how your fleet is retreating from a handful of primitive vessels. Sir, the intelligence reports were catastrophically inaccurate, Zakthal replied, struggling to maintain his composure as another explosion rocked the Devastator.
The humans possess technology that rivals or exceeds our own capabilities.
Their weapons penetrate quantum shields as if they don't exist, and their ships move at velocities that should tear them apart. Admiral Vextai's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes.
Commander, are you suggesting that a species that hasn't mastered faster-than-light travel poses a threat to the Third Talon fleet?
Sir, with respect, they clearly have mastered faster-than-light travel. Their ships are moving at near relativistic speeds in normal space, and I'm detecting what appears to be localized spacetime manipulation. These are not the primitive beings described in our files. The Admiral leaned forward, his scarred features filling the screen.
Commander, perhaps you've forgotten that the Empire has faced similar claims before. The Andromedans thought their crystal ships were invincible. The Void Runners believed their phase technology made them untouchable.
They all learned that technology cannot overcome superior numbers and experience.
You will stand and fight.
Admiral, I respectfully request permission to withdraw and reassess. My fleet is being systematically destroyed by weapons we don't understand.
Permission denied. The Admiral's voice carried finality.
You have 700 ships under your command, more firepower than most species see in their entire existence.
Use it. That's an order. The transmission cut off, leaving Zakthal staring at the blank screen.
Orders were orders, but the Admiral hadn't seen what he was seeing. The systematic precision with which the human fleets moved, the casual way they brushed off weapons that could crack planets, the impossible coordination across their forces, this wasn't just advanced technology. This was something that had been planned and prepared for decades, possibly centuries. All ships, defensive formation Tier 7, he commanded.
Concentrate our fire on their flagship.
If we can remove their command structure, sir, his tactical officer interrupted, the humans appear to have no command structure as we understand it. Each ship operates independently while maintaining perfect coordination.
Destroying their flagship might not affect their tactical capabilities at all.
The observation chilled Zakthal more than he cared to admit. Military doctrine across the galaxy depended on hierarchical command structures. Remove the head and the body would falter. But these humans seem to operate like a collective organism, each part capable of independent function while serving the greater whole. A new voice cut across the bridge's communication system, not through the normal channels, but somehow broadcast directly into their ship's internal network. The implications of such a feat were staggering.
Commander Zakthal, this is Admiral Chun. You seem to be having some difficulty with your retreat. Perhaps we could discuss terms for your surrender.
The bridge crew exchanged glances of amazement and fear. Breaching a military vessel's internal communication system should have been impossible with their quantum encryption protocols.
How are you accessing our communications? Zakthal demanded.
The same way we accessed your tactical databases 3 months ago, came the calm reply.
The same way we've been monitoring your fleet movements since you left your home system. Did you really think you could approach Sol without us knowing every detail of your capabilities?
The words hit Zakthal like a physical blow. If the humans had infiltrated their systems that thoroughly, then every tactical advantage, every piece of intelligence, every carefully planned strategy was worthless. They had been fighting blind from the very beginning.
That's impossible, he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew they weren't true. Is it, Commander?
Your empire has ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years because you were the only species to achieve faster-than-light travel and quantum manipulation. But what you never considered was that there might be other paths to the same destination.
Different approaches that led to the same level of technological advancement. What are you saying? Admiral Chen's voice carried a note of what almost sounded like pity.
We're saying that humanity didn't develop technology the way you expected us to.
We didn't follow your path because we didn't need to. We found our own way. On the tactical display, Zakthal could see human reinforcements continuing to arrive from across the solar system.
Ships emerged from asteroid fields, rose from the surfaces of moons, and seemed to simply appear in empty space as their stealth systems deactivated. The scale of the defensive network was becoming apparent, and it was vast beyond anything the Empire had anticipated.
How many ships do you have? He asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Enough, Commander. But this isn't about numbers. It's about preparation.
You see, we've known about your empire for a very long time. We've studied your tactics, analyzed your technology, and prepared for the day you decided we were worth your attention.
That's impossible. We only detected your civilization 50 years ago.
You detected our radio signals 50 years ago, Admiral Chen corrected.
We detected your scout probes 2 centuries ago.
We've had a long time to get ready for this conversation. The revelation struck Zakthal like a thunderbolt.
2 centuries of preparation.
200 years of studying their enemy while remaining hidden, developing countermeasures and strategies specifically designed to combat Imperial technology.
No wonder nothing was going according to plan.
Sir, his weapons officer called out, the humans are repositioning their fleets.
It looks like they're surrounding us completely.
Zakthal studied the tactical display and felt his blood run cold. The human ships were indeed moving into a perfect sphere around his fleet, maintaining precise distances and firing solutions. It was a classic encirclement maneuver, but executed with a precision that spoke of thousands of hours of practice and coordination. All ships, prepare for full assault, he ordered.
Target the nearest enemy vessels and fire everything we have.
If we're going to die here, we'll take as many of them with us as possible.
The Third Talon Fleet responded with devastating efficiency.
700 warships unleashed their combined arsenal in a concentrated barrage that should have been sufficient to sterilize a solar system. Pulse cannons, plasma torpedoes, quantum disruptors, and gravity bombs all converged on the nearest human ships in a display of firepower that had never been matched in galactic history.
The humans simply absorbed the attack.
Their shields flared and sparked under the assault, but none of them faltered. Energy that could have destroyed moons was dissipated harmlessly across defensive screens that shouldn't have been able to exist.
When the barrage ended, the human fleet remained completely intact. "Report on enemy damage," Zakthal demanded, though the tactical display already told him everything he needed to know.
"No confirmed hits, sir. Their defensive systems absorbed the entire barrage. Energy readings suggest they're using some form of exotic matter manipulation to redirect the incoming energy into alternate dimensions."
Alternate dimensions.
Zakthal had heard theories about such technology, but they remained firmly in the realm of theoretical physics.
The energy requirements alone should have made such defenses impossible for anything smaller than a moon-sized installation.
"Commander," Admiral Chen's voice returned to their communication system. "That was impressive.
Your fleet packs quite a punch. Unfortunately for you, we've had 2 centuries to develop countermeasures for your exact weapon systems." "How?"
The question escaped Zakthal's mandibles before he could stop it. "Captured technology, extensive analysis, and a few breakthroughs in applied physics that your empire never achieved. You see, Commander, while you were busy conquering primitive civilizations, we were busy solving the fundamental problems of energy manipulation and spacetime engineering."
Different priorities. A new alarm began sounding across the bridge as sensor readings spiked into impossible ranges.
Something was happening to the space around his fleet, and the distortions were growing stronger by the second. "Sir, massive gravitational anomalies throughout the fleet formation," his tactical officer reported, his voice tight with barely controlled panic.
"Spacetime distortions are appearing around our ships."
Through the viewing portal, Zakthal could see the stars beginning to bend and twist. The very fabric of space was being manipulated on a scale that dwarfed anything in Imperial technology. His ships, each protected by the strongest defensive systems known to galactic civilization, were being trapped like insects in amber.
"What are you doing to us?" he demanded.
"Ending this engagement with minimal casualties on both sides," Admiral Chen replied. "Your ships are being held in localized gravity wells that will prevent movement or weapons fire. Your life support systems remain functional, and your crews are in no immediate danger."
"This is impossible," Zakthal whispered, watching his mighty fleet rendered completely helpless by technology that shouldn't exist. "So was faster-than-light travel, until your ancestors figured it out.
So was quantum shield technology, until your engineers cracked the equations. So was gravity manipulation, until we did the same thing." Admiral Chen's voice carried a note of what might have been respect.
"You're not stupid, Commander.
You're just operating under assumptions that are no longer valid."
Around his fleet, Zakthal could see human vessels moving into boarding positions.
Sleek ships that moved with mechanical precision, their hulls bearing no visible weapons but radiating an aura of controlled lethality that made his combat instincts scream warnings. "The terms of your surrender are simple," Admiral Chen continued.
"Your crews will be treated according to galactic conventions for prisoners of war.
Your ships will be impounded pending diplomatic resolution. And you personally will have the honor of carrying a message back to your empire."
"What message?" "That humanity is no longer interested in remaining isolated. We're going to take our place in the galactic community, whether the Empire approves or not.
The age of imperial hegemony is ending, Commander.
What comes next depends on how quickly your leaders adapt to the new reality." Zakthal felt the weight of those words settling over him like a shroud. This hadn't been a battle, it had been a demonstration.
A carefully orchestrated display designed to send a message that would resonate throughout Imperial space.
Humanity wasn't asking permission to join the galaxy's great powers.
They were announcing their arrival. "You planned all of this," he said, the full scope of the deception finally becoming clear. "The positioning, the timing, even allowing us to get this far into your system.
You wanted us to attack." "We wanted you to understand," Admiral Chen corrected.
"Violence was never our preferred option, but your empire doesn't seem to respect any other form of communication.
Sometimes you have to speak in a language that will be understood."
The boarding shuttles were approaching now, small craft that moved with the same impossible precision as the larger ships. Zakthal could see his crew preparing for the inevitable, the surrender of the most powerful fleet in Imperial space to a species they had dismissed as primitives just hours ago. "My superiors will never accept this," he said. "The Empire has never backed down from a challenge." "Then, they'll keep sending fleets until they learn the same lesson you're learning today," Admiral Chen replied. "But, Commander, I hope you'll encourage them to consider a different approach.
The galaxy is large enough for all of us. We don't need to be enemies."
As the first human boarding parties made contact with his ship, Zakthal realized that everything he had believed about the nature of galactic civilization was fundamentally wrong. The Empire's dominance hadn't been based on inherent superiority, it had been based on being the first to achieve certain technological breakthroughs. But first didn't mean only, and humanity had just proven that there were other paths to power than the ones his people had chosen. The terror he felt now wasn't the fear of death or defeat, it was the existential dread of realizing that the universe was far more complex and dangerous than he had ever imagined. The human boarding parties moved through the corridors of the Devastator with a confidence that chilled Zakthal to his core. They weren't the primitive soldiers he had expected, creatures stumbling around in bulky environmental suits and carrying crude kinetic weapons. Instead, they flowed through his ship like water, their movements perfectly synchronized and their equipment seamlessly integrated with their bodies.
Their armor was unlike anything in Imperial databases.
Rather than the heavy plates and energy shields that characterized galactic military technology, the humans wore form-fitting suits that seemed to be grown rather than manufactured. The material shifted and adapted as they moved, providing protection that appeared both organic and mechanical. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to know exactly where they were going, navigating the ship's corridors with the familiarity of crew members who had served aboard for years. "How do they know our ship's layout?" demanded his security chief, a massive crowbar whose enhanced muscles were useless against enemies who had already neutralized his weapons. Zakthal didn't answer because he was beginning to suspect the truth, and it terrified him more than any battlefield defeat. The humans hadn't just been monitoring Imperial communications and fleet movements. They had been inside Imperial systems for decades, possibly centuries, studying every technical specification and tactical doctrine with the patience of a species that planned in terms of generations rather than years. The bridge doors hissed open with mechanical precision, and the first human soldier stepped into what had been the command center of the most powerful warship in the galaxy.
Zakthal's first thought was how utterly ordinary they looked.
No genetic modifications, no obvious cybernetic enhancements, no signs of the physical superiority that marked every other military species in the galaxy. They could have been civilians, if not for the aura of controlled lethality that surrounded them like a cold wind. The lead soldier, if that's what they were, removed their helmet to reveal features that were surprisingly young. A human female with dark hair and calm eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the bridge with professional interest. When she spoke, her voice carried the same measured tone that Admiral Chen had used, as if the conquest of an Imperial fleet was nothing more than a routine training exercise.
"Commander Zakthal, I'm Captain Rodriguez of the Seoul Defense Force. I need you and your senior staff to accompany me to the conference room for debriefing."
"Debriefing?" Zakthal's mandibles clicked in confusion.
"We're prisoners of war. What could you possibly need to debrief?"
Captain Rodriguez smiled, and the expression was somehow more unsettling than any threat would have been.
"Commander, you're not our prisoners. You're our guests."
"There's a significant difference, and I think you'll appreciate it once you understand what we're offering." The walk through his own ship felt surreal.
Human technicians were moving through the corridors with portable equipment, scanning and analyzing everything they encountered.
But they weren't looting or sabotaging, they were studying. Taking measurements, recording data, and examining the ship's systems with the thoroughness of scientists rather than conquerors.
"What are they doing?" asked his chief engineer, a spider-like arachnoid whose technical expertise had never been questioned until today.
"Learning," Captain Rodriguez replied simply. "Your ship represents the pinnacle of Imperial engineering. We'd like to understand how certain systems integrate with our own designs." "You're stealing our technology," Zakthal accused. "We're comparing notes," the captain corrected.
"You'd be surprised how much overlap there is between our approaches to certain problems. Different solutions, but similar underlying principles."
The conference room had been transformed. What had been a standard military briefing space now contained equipment that Zakthal didn't recognize, connected to displays showing information that made no immediate sense. His senior officers filed in behind him, their expressions ranging from bewilderment to barely controlled rage.
Admiral Chen was waiting for them, her image transmitted from the human flagship.
Even through the communication link, her presence dominated the room with the authority of someone who had just achieved the impossible. "Commander, I hope your crew is being treated well," she said without preamble. "I know this situation is unconventional, but I wanted to speak with you before your return to Imperial space."
Return? Zakthal's confusion was genuine. You're releasing us?
Of course.
This was never about holding prisoners or claiming territory. This was about establishing communication between our species on equal terms. Admiral Chen's expression softened slightly. "Commander, what do you know about human history?"
The question seemed to come from nowhere, and Zakthal struggled to understand its relevance. "Your species developed on a single world, achieved basic space travel within the last few centuries, and has spread to a few dozen nearby systems."
Why?
Because those facts, while technically correct, miss the most important aspects of our development.
Admiral Chen leaned forward, and her image resolved into sharper focus. Humans have been fighting wars for our entire recorded history.
Not just conflicts over territory or resources, but existential struggles where defeat meant extinction. We've faced plagues that killed half our population, natural disasters that reshaped continents, and social upheavals that redefined civilization itself. Zakthal waited for her to continue, sensing that this history lesson was leading somewhere significant. "Every generation of humans has faced challenges that seemed insurmountable," Admiral Chen continued. "And every generation found ways to overcome them. Not through individual superiority or technological advantages, but through cooperation, adaptation, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for the survival of our species." "I fail to see how this relates to our current situation," Zakthal replied, though he was beginning to suspect where this conversation was heading. "It relates, Commander, because when we detected your empire 2 centuries ago, we recognized what you represented. A successful predator species that had achieved dominance through military superiority and technological advancement. In human terms, you were an existential threat to our survival." Captain Rodriguez activated one of the displays, showing a timeline that stretched back 200 years. Zakthal could see markers indicating major events, technological breakthroughs, and what appeared to be massive industrial undertakings. "So we did what humans have always done when facing extinction," Admiral Chen continued. "We adapted. We unified. And we prepared for war on a scale that your empire has never encountered." The timeline showed the gradual transformation of human civilization from a collection of squabbling nation-states to something that resembled a single, coordinated organism. Massive construction projects spanning decades, scientific breakthroughs that solved fundamental problems of physics, and the systematic development of military capabilities specifically designed to counter imperial advantages. "You turned your entire species into a weapon," Zakthal realized with growing horror. "We turned our entire species into defenders," Admiral Chen corrected. "There's an important distinction. Weapons are designed to attack. Defenders are designed to survive." More displays activated around the conference room, showing data that made Zakthal's head spin. Production figures for military equipment that dwarfed anything the Empire had achieved. Scientific research programs involving millions of participants working toward common goals. Industrial capabilities that could construct fleets of warships in months rather than years. "This is impossible," his chief engineer whispered, staring at manufacturing data that violated everything he understood about resource allocation and industrial capacity. "Is it?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "Your empire controls thousands of worlds, but most of them contribute a small percentage of their capabilities to the common defense. Earth controls one star system, but every world, every station, every citizen contributes everything they have to our collective survival." "You're talking about a slave state," accused his political officer, a pale bureaucrat whose job was to ensure loyalty to imperial doctrine. We're talking about a democracy that chose to prioritize survival over individual comfort, Admiral Chen replied calmly.
Every human citizen voted for the policies that led to this moment. Every family chose to dedicate their lives to preparing for your arrival.
When your species faces extinction, individual preferences become secondary to collective survival. Zachthal studied the data displays with growing unease. The sheer scale of human military preparation was staggering, but what disturbed him more was the systematic nature of it. This wasn't the rushed mobilization of a species facing imminent invasion. This was the methodical, generational effort of a civilization that had decided to transform itself into something capable of challenging the greatest military power in the galaxy. "How many ships do you actually have?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer.
"Enough," Admiral Chan replied.
"But, Commander, you're asking the wrong question.
The number of ships doesn't matter.
What matters is that every human ship represents 2 centuries of preparation specifically designed to counter Imperial technology and tactics." Captain Rodriguez activated another display, showing weapon systems that made Zachthal's blood run cold.
Singularity weapons that could unmake matter at the subatomic level. Dimensional shields that redirected incoming energy into alternate realities. Faster-than-light drives that operated on completely different principles from Imperial technology. "You achieved all of this in 200 years?" his chief engineer asked in disbelief.
"We achieved this because we had 200 years and a clear goal," Captain Rodriguez replied. "Your empire developed its technology over millennia while conquering primitive civilizations. We developed our technology in decades while preparing to fight the greatest military power in galactic history. Different challenges produce different solutions."
Admiral Chan's expression grew more serious. "Commander, I want you to understand something crucial.
What you experienced today was not humanity at full war footing. This was a defensive demonstration using a small fraction of our capabilities. If your empire chooses to escalate this conflict, you'll face something that no military force in galactic history has ever encountered."
"What do you mean?" Zachthal asked, though he dreaded the answer.
"I mean that every human world is a fortress. Every human ship is a weapon specifically designed to kill Imperial vessels.
Every human citizen is a soldier trained from childhood to fight for species survival.
If you force us into a full war, you won't be fighting an army or a navy or even a civilization. You'll be fighting an entire species that has spent 2 centuries preparing to destroy you." The silence that followed was deafening. Zachthal stared at the display showing human industrial capacity and military preparations, trying to process the implications of what he was seeing. This wasn't just advanced technology or superior tactics. This was the methodical transformation of an entire species into the perfect weapon for fighting the Empire. "Why are you telling us this?" he asked finally. "Why not just destroy our fleet and send the Empire a clear message?"
Admiral Chan's expression softened slightly. "Because destruction isn't our goal, Commander. Survival is. We're hoping that your empire will choose to accept humanity as an equal partner rather than a conquered territory. The galaxy is vast enough for both of us, but only if we can find a way to coexist. And if the empire refuses?
Then, we'll do what humans have always done when faced with extinction," Admiral Chen replied quietly.
"We'll fight until either we survive or there's nothing left to protect."
Zachthal felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. He was beginning to understand that this wasn't just a military defeat, it was the emergence of something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that had voluntarily transformed itself into the perfect instrument of war, not for conquest but for survival. And if the Empire chose to press this conflict, they would be facing an enemy that was willing to sacrifice everything rather than accept defeat. The journey back to Imperial space felt like traveling through a nightmare that refused to end. Zachthal sat in the captain's chair of his flagship, surrounded by the familiar consoles and displays of the bridge, but nothing felt the same. His ship had been returned to him in perfect condition, better than perfect, actually, since the human technicians had somehow improved several critical systems during their brief occupation.
That fact alone was more disturbing than any threat could have been.
Admiral Vextai's scarred face filled the communication screen, his expression growing darker with each piece of intelligence that Zakthal delivered. The Supreme Admiral had built his reputation on the certainty that Imperial technology and tactics were unbeatable. Hearing about weapons that ignored quantum shields and ships that moved faster than physics should allow was clearly challenging every assumption that had guided his military career. "Repeat the part about their industrial capacity," the Admiral commanded, his voice carrying dangerous undertones.
Zakthal consulted his notes, though the numbers were burned into his memory.
"Sir, based on what they showed us, human manufacturing capabilities exceed our own by a factor of at least 50 to 1. Every world in their system has been converted into a military-industrial complex. They can construct a fleet the size of mine in approximately 6 weeks.
That's impossible. No civilization can sustain that level of resource allocation without collapsing."
"Sir, they've been doing it for 2 centuries.
Their entire society has been restructured around military preparation.
Every citizen is a potential soldier, every factory is a potential weapons manufacturer, every research facility is dedicated to improving their defensive capabilities." Admiral Vextai leaned back in his command chair, his expression thoughtful.
"And their actual fleet strength?" "Unknown, sir.
They wouldn't give us specific numbers, but, based on what we observed."
Zakthal paused, trying to find words for something that defied military logic.
"Sir, I don't think they have a fleet in the traditional sense.
I think their entire civilization is their fleet."
"Explain." "Every ship we encountered was crewed by civilians who happened to be soldiers. Every weapon system was operated by scientists who happened to be warriors. They don't separate military and civilian infrastructure because they don't see a distinction between defending their homes and fighting a war." The Admiral's expression grew more troubled.
"Commander, are you telling me that this species has turned their entire population into a military force?"
"No, sir. I'm telling you that this species doesn't distinguish between population and military force. In their minds, every human is responsible for the defense of humanity. They don't have professional soldiers, they have an entire species of part-time warriors who happen to be the most dedicated and well-equipped military force I've ever encountered." Admiral Vextai stood up from his chair and paced across the bridge of his flagship, his movements betraying the agitation he was trying to control.
"Commander, what you're describing violates every principle of military organization that has governed galactic warfare for millennia. No civilization can maintain that level of military readiness without destroying their economic base."
"Sir, with respect, I think we need to abandon our assumptions about how civilizations are supposed to work," Zakthal replied carefully. "The humans have achieved something that shouldn't be possible, but the evidence is overwhelming. They've created a society that functions as both a thriving civilization and a military machine simultaneously."
"And their technology?"
This was the part that Zakthal had been dreading.
"Sir, in some areas they're decades ahead of us.
Their weapons technology is specifically designed to counter our defensive systems. Their shield technology operates on principles that our scientists don't understand.
And their manufacturing capabilities allow them to field equipment that would be considered experimental prototypes in Imperial service. How long do you estimate it would take for us to develop countermeasures?" Zakthal felt his mandibles clicking nervously.
"Sir, I don't think we can develop countermeasures. Their technology isn't just advanced, it's specifically designed to be immune to Imperial weapons and tactics. They've spent 2 centuries studying our capabilities and developing perfect counters for everything we have." The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long. Admiral Vextai stared at the tactical displays showing the position of the Third Talon fleet, or what remained of it. 700 ships had entered the Sol system. 73 ships had returned, and most of those bore damage from weapons that shouldn't have existed. "Admiral," Zakthal continued carefully, "there's something else you need to know. The humans claim they've been monitoring our communications for decades.
If that's true, then they know about our fleet movements, our strategic planning, possibly even our defensive preparations."
"That's a serious accusation, Commander." "Sir, they knew our ship's internal layout better than some of my crew members. They accessed our tactical databases during the engagement. And they demonstrated knowledge of Imperial military doctrine that should have been classified beyond their reach.
Admiral Vextai's expression grew deadly. Are you suggesting that we have a security breach of unprecedented scope?
I'm suggesting that we may have been operating under complete surveillance for longer than we've known humanity existed, Zakthal replied. If they're telling the truth, then every military secret, every strategic plan, every technological innovation has been observed and analyzed by human intelligence for 2 centuries. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If the humans had indeed been monitoring Imperial communications for that long, then the Empire's military advantage had been an illusion for generations. Every fleet movement, every technological breakthrough, every strategic decision had been made under the observation of an enemy that was methodically preparing to counter their every capability.
Sir, Zakthal added quietly, they offered us a choice.
Join them as equals in what they call a galactic community, or face the consequences of continued aggression.
The Empire doesn't negotiate with primitives.
Sir, with respect, these are not primitives. These are possibly the most advanced military civilization the galaxy has ever seen, and they're offering us a chance to avoid a war that could destroy both of our species.
Admiral Vextai's laugh was cold and bitter.
Commander, the Empire has never backed down from a challenge, and we're not about to start with a species that learned to fly between stars last week.
If these humans want a war, we'll give them one they'll never forget.
Admiral, I don't think you understand the scope of what we're facing, Zakthal said desperately. This isn't just another conquest campaign.
This is total war against an enemy that has spent 2 centuries preparing specifically to fight us.
They have advantages we can't counter and resources we can't match. Every enemy has said the same thing, Commander.
The Andromedans claimed their crystal ships were invincible. The Void Runners thought their phase technology made them untouchable.
They all learned that determination and superior numbers can overcome any technological advantage.
But, even as Admiral Vextai spoke the words, Zakthal could see doubt in his eyes. The reports from the Sol system were unlike anything in Imperial military history. A complete fleet defeat with minimal enemy casualties wasn't just unusual, it was unprecedented.
No force in galactic history had ever achieved such a decisive victory against Imperial ships. Sir, what are your orders?
Zakthal asked, though he suspected the answer would doom both species to a conflict that would reshape the galaxy. Full mobilization, Admiral Vextai replied grimly.
Every fleet, every vessel, every world in the Empire. If these humans want to challenge Imperial authority, they'll face the full might of 10,000 years of military supremacy. Sir, they're expecting that response. They told us they were prepared for full-scale war. Then, they'll discover what full-scale war actually means when practiced by the Empire.
The Admiral's expression hardened into the look of absolute determination that had made him legendary. Commander, you'll remain with the advance scouts to gather intelligence on human defensive preparations.
I want to know everything about their capabilities before we commit our main forces.
Admiral, I respectfully request reassignment to any other duty. The request clearly surprised the Admiral. Explain.
Zakthal struggled to find words for the dread that had been growing in his chest since the moment the first human ship had appeared on his screens. Sir, I've seen what they're capable of, and I don't think the Empire can win this war. I've served faithfully for 30 years, and I've never questioned Imperial superiority before.
But these humans aren't just another species with advanced technology. They're something entirely different. Different how?
They're what we would become if we spent 2 centuries preparing to fight gods, Zakthal said quietly. They've transformed their entire civilization into a weapon specifically designed to destroy us.
And, sir, I think they're going to succeed. Admiral Vextai studied his subordinate for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Commander, your request is denied. You have more experience with human capabilities than any other officer in the fleet. That makes you invaluable for what's coming.
What is coming, sir?
The largest military mobilization in Imperial history, the Admiral replied grimly.
Every fleet, every ship, every weapon in the Empire will be brought to bear against the Sol system. If these humans want to challenge us, they'll they'll face 20,000 warships in the largest space battle the galaxy has ever seen.
Zakthal felt his heart sink as he realized that Admiral Vextai had learned nothing from his defeat. The Empire was about to commit everything they had to a battle against an enemy that had spent 2 centuries preparing for exactly this moment. It would be a slaughter, but he wasn't sure which species would be doing the slaughtering. "Sir, they warned us about escalation," he said one last time. "They specifically said that if we forced them into full war, we would be fighting their entire species." "Good," Admiral Vextai replied with cold satisfaction. "When we destroy their entire species, it will send a message to every other civilization in the galaxy about the price of challenging imperial authority." As the communication ended, Zakthal stared at the blank screen and tried not to think about the look of absolute confidence he had seen in Admiral Chen's eyes. The humans weren't afraid of imperial escalation, they were expecting it. And, somehow, that terrified him more than any weapon they had demonstrated. 6 months later, Zakthal stood on the observation deck of the Imperial Super Dreadnought Eternal Dominion, watching the largest military fleet in galactic history prepare for what Admiral Vextai had proclaimed would be the final battle of human resistance. 20,000 warships stretched across space in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the dark metal that had conquered 100 worlds. Each vessel represented the pinnacle of Imperial military engineering, and, together they carried enough firepower to crack open planets. It should have been a moment of pride and anticipation. Instead, Zakthal felt nothing but cold dread as he watched the fleet prepare to jump to the Sol system. The past months had brought a steady stream of disturbing intelligence reports. Human ships had been detected throughout Imperial space, not attacking but observing. Watching fleet movements, studying defensive positions, and seemingly cataloging every aspect of Imperial military capability. When Imperial forces moved to intercept these reconnaissance vessels, they simply vanished, not retreating, but disappearing as if they had never existed. Worse still were the reports from the outer colonies. Communications blackouts lasting for hours at a time. Sensor networks that detected massive gravitational anomalies before going offline. Supply convoys that arrived at their destinations missing crews, though the ships themselves remained undamaged and their cargo holds were filled with data storage devices containing detailed scans of Imperial technology. "Commander," Admiral Vextai's voice cut through his thoughts, "final intelligence briefing in 10 minutes. Zakthal turned from the observation port and made his way through corridors that hummed with barely contained energy. The Eternal Dominion was more than just a ship, it was a mobile fortress capable of functioning as a fleet command center and equipped with weapons that could sterilize continents. If the humans wanted to face the full might of the Empire, they would learn what 10,000 years of military evolution could achieve. The briefing room was filled with the Empire's most senior military commanders, each representing fleets that had never known defeat. Admiral Vextai stood before a tactical display that showed the Sol system in perfect detail, every planet and asteroid marked with defensive installations that Imperial intelligence had catalogued over the past months. "Gentlemen," the Admiral began, his voice carrying absolute confidence, "today we end humanity's delusion of military superiority. Our scouts have confirmed that the humans have fortified their system, but their preparations are exactly what we expected from a species operating under panic and desperation." The tactical display zoomed in on Earth's orbital space, showing defensive platforms and ship formations that looked impressive until compared to the massive fleet preparing to face them. Zakthal studied the images and felt his unease growing. The human preparations looked almost routine. As if they were setting up for a training exercise rather than the battle that would determine their species' survival. Intelligence estimates suggest approximately 10,000 human vessels defending the system, Admiral Vextai continued. Advanced for their technology level, but still operating with the fundamental limitations that prevent primitive species from achieving true military capability. General Mordak, a scarred veteran whose cybernetic implants gleamed in the artificial light, raised one of his mechanical arms. "Admiral, what about their demonstrated capability to penetrate our defensive systems?" "Isolated incidents involving surprise tactics and superior positioning," the Admiral replied dismissively. "Under controlled conditions with proper fleet coordination, their advantages become negligible." Zakthal wanted to object, to point out that nothing about the human capabilities he had witnessed suggested they were dependent on surprise or positioning.
But he had already voiced his concerns and been overruled. The Empire's military doctrine was based on overwhelming force applied with mechanical precision, and no theoretical technological advantage could overcome 20-to-1 numerical superiority. The battle plan is straightforward, Admiral Vextai continued, activating new sections of the tactical display. 3 phases of engagement designed to systematically eliminate human resistance while minimizing our own casualties. Phase 1 involved long-range bombardment from the outer system, using the fleet's massive guns to destroy human defensive installations before they could respond effectively. Phase 2 would see the fleet advance to medium range, engaging human ships with concentrated fire from multiple directions simultaneously. Phase 3 would be orbital bombardment of human worlds, forcing surrender through the threat of planetary destruction. It was a textbook example of imperial military strategy, refined over millennia of successful campaigns against primitive species. The plan should have worked perfectly against any conventional enemy. Sir, Sackthal found himself speaking despite his better judgment. What if the humans don't respond conventionally? Admiral Vextai's expression hardened. Commander, explain your concern. Sir, everything we've observed about human tactics suggests they don't follow standard military doctrine. They may not defend static positions or engage in predictable fleet actions. Then, they'll be destroyed piecemeal as they attempt whatever desperate measures they've planned, the Admiral replied coldly. Unconventional tactics are the refuge of inferior forces. They may achieve temporary successes, but they cannot overcome systematic military superiority. The briefing continued with detailed assignments for each fleet and specific targeting priorities for the opening bombardment. Everything was planned with the mechanical precision that had made the Empire's military the most feared force in the galaxy. There were contingencies for every conceivable scenario and backup plans for every possible complication. Everything except the possibility that the humans had been planning for this exact moment for 2 centuries. Fleet commanders to your ships, Admiral Vextai announced. Jump coordinates are locked in. We arrive in the Sol system in 1 hour. The next 60 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Sackthal remained on the observation deck, watching the massive ships of the Imperial fleet as they prepared for what should have been the largest space battle in galactic history. Each vessel was a testament to Imperial technological superiority, armed with weapons that could destroy lesser fleets and protected by shields that had never been penetrated by enemy fire. But, as the fleet prepared to jump, Sackthal found himself remembering Admiral Chen's calm confidence and Captain Rodriguez's casual professionalism. The humans he had met hadn't acted like a species facing extinction. They had acted like professionals doing a job they had trained for their entire lives. All ships, prepare for jump, Admiral Vextai's voice echoed across the fleet communication system. Target, Sol system. Mission, complete pacification of human resistance. Execute jump in 10, 9, 8. The countdown reached 0, and 20,000 Imperial warships disappeared into hyperspace, bound for what their commanders believed would be an easy victory against primitive defenders. They emerged from hyperspace into hell. The Sol system had been transformed into something that defied every principle of defensive warfare that Sackthal had ever studied. There were no fixed defensive positions, no concentrated fleet formations, no obvious strategic targets. Instead, space itself seemed to be weaponized. Gravitational anomalies twisted the fabric of reality around entire Imperial battle groups. Energy fields that shouldn't have been possible disrupted ship systems across vast distances. And, everywhere, emerging from what had appeared to be empty space, were human vessels. Not thousands of ships, as Imperial intelligence had estimated. Tens of thousands. Hundreds of thousands. More warships than had ever been assembled in galactic history, each one moving with the mechanical precision of a single, vast organism. All ships, battle formation. Admiral Vextai's voice carried over the fleet communication system, but the words were barely audible over the chaos erupting across the Imperial fleet. Ships that had jumped in perfect formation found themselves scattered across the system, isolated and surrounded by human forces that moved with impossible coordination. The opening barrage came from every direction simultaneously. Not the energy weapons that Imperial intelligence had expected, but something far worse. Reality itself became unstable around Imperial vessels as human weapons manipulated the fundamental forces of the universe. Ships simply ceased to exist as spacetime distortions consumed them completely. Others found themselves trapped in gravity wells that compressed their hulls to the size of marbles. "Report!" Zakthal shouted into his communication system, but half the fleet wasn't responding. In the first 30 seconds of engagement, more Imperial vessels had been destroyed than in the previous century of warfare combined. "Sir," his tactical officer's voice was tight with panic, "I'm detecting massive energy sources throughout the system. The humans aren't just defending their worlds, they've turned the entire star system into a weapon." Through the chaos, Admiral Chen's voice cut across the Imperial communication frequencies with the same calm professionalism she had demonstrated months earlier.
"Admiral Vextai, this is Admiral Chen. You were warned about the consequences of escalation.
Surrender now, and we'll allow your surviving ships to withdraw."
"Never." Admiral Vextai's response was transmitted across all frequencies, his voice carrying the rage of a commander watching his perfect plan disintegrate. "The Empire does not surrender to primitives."
"Then, you'll discover what happens when primitives have 2 centuries to prepare for your arrival," Admiral Chen replied quietly. What followed wasn't a battle, it was a systematic demonstration of technological superiority so overwhelming that it redefined Zakthal's understanding of warfare. Human ships moved through space like they owned it, appearing and disappearing at will, striking with weapons that ignored every defensive system Imperial science had developed. They didn't just defeat Imperial technology, they made it irrelevant. The Eternal Dominion, the mightiest warship ever constructed, lasted exactly 4 minutes against a single human vessel 1/10 its size. The quantum shields that could deflect planet-killing weapons simply weren't there when the human attack arrived. The hull armor that had been forged in stellar cores crumpled like paper. The crew of 50,000, the finest warriors in the galaxy, never had a chance to fight back. Admiral Vextai's final transmission was barely coherent. "Impossible, this is impossible, 10,000 years of supremacy."
And then, silence.
Zakthal found himself floating in an escape pod, one of perhaps a dozen survivors from the greatest military fleet in galactic history. Around him, the debris of 20,000 warships drifted in the solar wind, the remains of Imperial supremacy reduced to scrap metal and fading energy signatures. A human rescue ship approached with the same mechanical precision that had characterized everything about their species. As the airlock cycled open, Zakthal came face to face with Captain Rodriguez again, her expression showing neither triumph nor satisfaction, just professional competence. "Commander Zakthal," she said simply, "Admiral Chen would like to speak with you." The communication was established moments later, and Admiral Chen appeared on the small screen with the same calm demeanor she had maintained throughout the destruction of everything Zakthal had believed about military power. "Commander, I'm sorry it came to this," she said, and the sympathy in her voice seemed genuine.
"Your empire was given a choice.
Unfortunately, your leaders chose to interpret our defensive preparations as a challenge to their authority." "You destroyed them," Zakthal whispered, still unable to process the scope of what he had witnessed.
20,000 ships, gone in minutes."
"We defended ourselves," Admiral Chen corrected. "Your fleet came here to destroy our civilization."
"We responded appropriately. What happens now?" Admiral Chen's expression grew thoughtful.
"Now we have a conversation with your empire about the new reality of galactic politics. Humanity is no longer interested in hiding in our single star system. We're going to take our place among the galaxy's great powers, and we're going to do it as equals, not subjects."
"The Empire will never accept that."
"Then, the Empire will learn the same lesson your fleet just learned," Admiral Chen replied quietly. "We didn't want this war, Commander. But we spent 2 centuries preparing for it, and we're very good at finishing what others start." As the rescue ship carried him away from the graveyard of Imperial supremacy, Zakthal realized that everything he had believed about the nature of galactic civilization was wrong. The Empire's dominance hadn't been based on inherent superiority, it had been based on being alone at the top of the technological pyramid. But humanity had climbed to the top by a different path, and they had brought weapons that the Empire had never imagined. The age of Imperial dominance was over, ended not by rebellion or political upheaval, but but by the simple emergence of something better. The terror he felt now wasn't fear of death or defeat, it was the existential dread of realizing that his species, the conquerors of 1,000 worlds, had been nothing more than the biggest predator in a small pond. Until something from the deep ocean had decided to visit.